Join our Patreon.
Do you really want to know? We are Mythvision.
Dr. Price, we have more questions. Kevin Maxwell in the Mythvision group wants to know, just your opinion here, what is the best book to read about the contemporary Gnosticism around the origin of the New Testament?
You mean, the ancient Gnosticism. I guess probably it's still, I believe it's just Gnosis by Kurt Rudolph, who sadly just passed away. It's encyclopedic but very readable, and it talks about how I'm pretty sure he believed in a historical Jesus, but he sees Jesus, John the Baptist, etc., as part of the baptizing gnosis, I think he calls it, of the Jordan Valley. And that because you can't really exclude the Qumran people from that whole thing. I mean, there must have been degrees, and like Eisenman argues, it was sort of like Martin Luther's Schwärmerei, the swarming, buzzing insects of sectarianism, that there are a whole lot of kind of similar related groups, though they didn't all believe exactly the same thing. But with Bultmann called the religion of the Dead Sea Scrolls a kind of Jewish Gnosticism already. And he, for one thing, the Mandeans appear to be part of that. They're still around, and they call themselves the Nazareans, interestingly, though the Mandean tag, I guess they don't repudiate it. It's based on the Aramaic word for knowledge or gnosis, and they are a surviving Gnostic sect that claims to be the movement of John the Baptist. And scholars have generally doubted that, like Edwin Yamauchi, he's an evangelical apologist, but he's also a great and profound scholar of Mandeanism, one of the authorities. And I've always enjoyed his work. I mean, there are a handful of these apologists that, while I kind of see what they're doing, they really do make a contribution. And he's one of them. I love John Warwick Montgomery, though I disagree with just about everything he says, but he's terrific. And there's some other ones. And he tries to say that, no, they came up with a fictional link to John the Baptist because in the Muslim encroachment, you were only safe if you were a member of one of the peoples of the book, biblically related religions, like the, Jews and Christians. They kind of got a break because the Muslims expected them to accept the Quran, and they didn't. So you have different attitudes toward them in the Quran. But there's also a group called the Sabians, who are mentioned in the Quran, that they considered one of the peoples of the book. We don't really know who they are, but one of the theories is that they were the Mandeans. And Yamauchi said that like everything else was taken already, so they said, well, we're the descendants of John the Baptist, because he's mentioned in the Quran too. However, I find that difficult to believe, mainly because they hate Jesus as a false Messiah. And it's very clear in their writings. And John the Baptist is kind of an incarnation of one of the archangels that they worship as revealers. I can't see how, if you were trying to be in the under the biblical umbrella, that you would take that attitude toward Jesus, because Muslims certainly don't. So I can't quite buy that. I think they really do go back there. And the parallels between the Gospel of John, light and darkness, the Spirit of truth, and all this, John's Gospel and the Dead Sea Scrolls, I have to say that you can't say, well, that's Jewish Essenism, not Gnosticism, so Bultmann can stuff it up as higher critical. But whereas I think Bultmann was right saying that no, these guys were Gnostics. They made you memorize the secret names of the angels. Why would that be? Well, in Gnosticism, you had to know it to escape the vigilance of these angels, who were not good guys. They were like guards on the Berlin Wall trying to keep spirits from ascending back to God. And there are other things that sound kind of Gnostic. But if Kurt Rudolph was right, and the Qumran group is related to the Mandeans, you've definitely got Jewish Gnosticism. I don't know what else you would call the Mandeans, because of Aramaic speakers and all that. So I think that Kurt Rudolph does make that connection, and also explains loads of other stuff about different Gnostic groups. So I would say that would be the one great book on that.
I wanted to ask, following up with this, because I'm interested in hearing your opinion. What is your opinion of Elaine Pagels? Am I pronouncing her last name correct? What is your opinion of her works from your perspective?
I think they're superficial, and there are certain things that I haven't seen in her books, but that I have the few times I've seen her speak publicly, where she seems surprisingly ignorant of some things. Maybe not real important ones, but pretty surprising. And like she wrote a book called The Origin of Satan, which is based on the only weak argument of the great James M. Robinson, a Bultmann disciple. He said that because of parallels in Mark between demon exorcisms and conflicts with the scribes and Pharisees, that Mark is somehow equating the two. I just don't buy that. It seems arbitrary, but that's kind of the basis for Pagels' approach. And she doesn't mention Zoroastrianism and Ahriman, the evil anti-god. I don't know how it's possible she doesn't figure that into it. She often mentions a saying from the Gospel of Thomas: if you bring forth that which is in you, what is within you will save you. But if you do not bring forth what is within you will destroy you. That's not a translation of that saying. Rather, the second part is, if you don't have it within you, that lack will destroy you. And I asked her about that once. I said, I cannot find any translation of Thomas that reads that way. And she said, well, that was the best sense she could make of it. I mean, I like her version better, but that's not what it says. And there are things that where I think she doesn't really seem to know what she's talking about. On the other hand, there are a couple of her books that I like very much. Like she needn't have written anything after the Gnostic Gospels, because there she has a very creative, in the good sense, insightful reconstruction of what Gnosticism was like, not just as a school of thought, but as communities and so on. What values can we see in their scriptures? The fact that they have the female divinity and so on, that's got to mean something. She infers the actual shape of the people that read these books as scriptures. And I don't know if anybody else has really done that, but she does it in simple, accessible, convincing terms. So I think that's a terrific book. But and another one, Adam, Eve, and the Serpent, I found pretty interesting. That I read right after I read Dennis MacDonald's The Legend and the Apostle, about Paul, the Acts of Paul, and the Pastoral Epistles. And those two really set me on the track of my dissertation, The Widow Traditions of Luke Acts. So I'm grateful for her work, but I see some shortcomings in it. Maybe that's just because I'm ignorant. I mean, that's always possible. I may not be understanding her correctly, but I have a sort of a love-hate relationship there. That's putting it too strong, I guess. But,
Join our Patreon